Hi, Leroy here. Today, we're going to talk about keys and scales, specifically as it relates to the Verselab. We're not going to talk in all that much depth. There's going to be a lot of stuff I'm leaving out or stuff I'm talking about specifically as it relates to the Verselab, but I hope this is going to help us get up to speed a little more on how to use these pads a little bit more efficiently and how to talk more about scale and key. We'll be talking about intervals a little more specifically in the next lesson on chords, but I'm glad you're here and I hope you'll stay and we'll learn about this. So first of all, in Western music, we only have 12 notes. The smallest interval between two notes is called a half step or semitone. You'll hear it called that as well. When the Verselab first boots up, you're in what's called chromatic mode, and that has every single note. Each of these pads has the same interval between the pads. They're each one half step. Or one semitone. So this entire thing, it has an octave and what's called a minor third. We'll talk about, again, intervals in the next lesson, but you can see the octaves are white pads. If you're not selected on one of the pads, you can see they're white. See, this is the octave. The note it starts on by default is C. So this is also C. An octave just means it goes up to the same note. So you have 12 notes between your first note and when you get to the same note again. You have 12 distinct notes. That's all we have in Western music. So it sounds like this. That's 12, and then here's the octave. Here's the same note as we started on, an octave higher. That's the same note, right? So we have 12 distinct notes. Notice it goes from 1 to 12. This is pad 12, this is pad 1, right? So we have 12 notes. On the piano, it looks like this. Right? So that's the same 12 notes. It goes from here to here. That's the same thing on this as from here to here. That's the range we have in chromatic mode. We have just over an octave. Most electronic music devices, like keyboards like this, are going to give you at least 2 octaves. So it goes from, they usually at the smallest will go from here to here. And in chromatic mode, the Verselab only goes to here. So it's not a whole lot. But there is more to it than that. See, in Western music, typically scales and keys are what we call heptatonic. That's just a fancy way of saying we only have 7 notes. So when you're working in a key or a scale, you've only got 7 notes to work with. So that would say you're working in a major scale, right? That would sound like this. Right? That's C major, it's only 7 notes. And when you get to the 8th note, that's the octave again. That's the same note, so it looks like this. Right? All the white keys in C major, 7 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then it goes back to C, back to 1. So when we're looking at this arrangement here with these chromatic pads, it's not all that useful. It is frustrating sometimes to deal with that. So before we get into how we can mitigate some of that and make it more easy for us to use, let's talk about what makes up a scale and a key and how they're different. Talking about it in simple terms may be a little difficult, so we're going to just start by saying on the Verselab, it doesn't really matter. And I challenge everybody when they're first learning about music to learn all of their, learn in one specific key. So learn C major and C minor and C Dorian and C Lydian. Learn everything on one note. And especially in electronic music, so many things start at C by default. Even the Verselab always starts at C. This is C when you boot it up, right? So many electronic things start at C, and so many things are written in C minor, especially for EDM stuff. So it's really useful to learn these things on C. So when we're talking the Verselab, really we're just talking about, when you talk about the key, you're talking about where does your pad start. So if you're in something C major, C minor, C Lydian, that just means this pad is going to be C. If you're in G major or G Lydian or G minor, that just means this starts at G. If you're in a chromatic mode, that doesn't change anything else. All the pads are still the same. We'll look at that in just a second. So what do we mean when we talk about scales and keys? A key, and again, typically we talk about you have seven notes in a key or a scale in Western music. So in a key, you're talking about using 7 notes and which 7 notes you can use. So if you're in, C, right? You're in C, playing all the white notes, we are in C. That is C. That's the key of C, right? If you have 1 sharp, you're in the key of F. Or key of G, sorry. You can play them in any order as long as you have, F, sharp, you're in the key of G, or if you have B flat, you're in the key of F, right? When we're talking about a scale specifically, we're talking about a key, a set of 7 notes, but also an order of those notes. So for instance, if we're in C major, we're saying we're starting at C and we're going up to C, only playing the white notes. That's C major. But you could also be in a key of C, a key with just the white notes, starting on A. And if you do that, you're still playing all the white notes, but now you're in A minor. It's a very fine distinction, but a scale has a start and an end. And also with scales, you have a specific set and order of intervals. So let's look at C major. C major starts on C, and it sounds like this, right? That's C major. There's a set of intervals that makes a major scale. So for instance, in C major, and this is every major scale, the set of intervals is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So again, remember I told you that the 2 nearest notes are going to be a half step. This is a half step. This is a half step. This is a half step, right? These are all half steps. This is in your chromatic scale. Right? Same thing. Okay, so in C major, playing just the white notes, right? So you've got a whole step because you're skipping this one in the middle. It's a whole step, then a whole step because you're skipping this in the middle, then a half step because these are right next door, then a whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So whole step, half step, whole step, half step. That's a major scale. And because we're starting on C, we're saying this is C major. You can do that starting from any note. If you start on E flat right here, right? If you do the same pattern, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. That's a major scale, but notice we had to use black notes to do that. We had to use black note here, here, and here, because that's how the pattern comes out. That's what the scale is. That's what a major scale is that pattern of intervals. Right? And you could play that here too, although the scale is not right for this right now. But anyway, so that's the difference between a scale and key. The key you're in just tells you which 7 notes you're going to use, which you're going to allow in this song. And the scale tells you what pattern you're using with those 7 notes. So you may have noticed that when we were talking about C major and C minor is on the white keys. C minor is also on the white keys, but it's just down a couple notes. Right? There's a whole concept of modes we're not going to get into today. It's out of scale for today. But just know that the note that you start on, how you define the home of something will define how it sounds. If you, for instance, watch this. See if I can get my camera out of the way here. Nope. If you're just playing some chords, right? Major. Minor. The notes you're using are defined by the scale you're in. Anyway, so how does that relate to the Verselab, right? What am I getting at here? How does this work? How does this affect us at all? First of all, we should know that you don't really need to change your key, right? I often work just as it's set in C minor and go from there, or C chromatic, right? Because you can always transpose things later. When this was important was when you're composing for an orchestra or something. The instruments, because of the way harmonics work, will sound different at different octaves and they have different ranges. Or if you're working with a vocalist who can't sing in a certain range, great. But if you're just composing, just trying to get an idea down, don't worry about what key it's in. Just start writing, right? If you're playing in a major key, it's going to be the same whether you're in C major or F major or G major or A flat major. If you're in a minor key, it doesn't matter if you're in E flat minor or D minor or A minor. Just play what you've got. So here are some of the things the Verselab does to make it a little easier for us to work. Because again, we've only got 16 pads here, and that's our entire range, right? Again, that range is very small. So in the Verselab, we can push edit over here, and then note. And this is when we're in sequencer. We're on the sequencer part of the workflow, and we're in note mode, right? So make sure you're in the sequencer part of the workflow, in note mode, then edit, note. You have 2 settings in here, scale and key. So all key does, the only thing key does on this setting is change what this note is. Right now it's C, C sharp, D, D sharp, right? That is it. Everything else is the same. Notice if it starts on C, and let's start here on E, right? So here's C. This is the first note. So this is E, right? What if we start on E? So instead of E being here, it's here. Watch. So now that's the note we were playing before. It's the same thing. The intervals don't change because in a chromatic scale, every note is the next nearest neighbor. So all this does, essentially, all key does in note settings is change what the bottom pad is, what the note of the bottom pad is. E, D, C, B, A sharp, right? Also, of note, the Verselab doesn't use flats, it only uses sharps. So you're never gonna see, D flat or B flat or, G flat. It's always gonna be sharps. We'll talk about anharmonics next time, maybe. Anyway, so that's the key setting. All it does is set your bottom note, and honestly, it is not that useful. What is more useful is the scales you can choose. So if you scroll down, the other setting in here is scales. By default, it's chromatic. That means, again, every note is a half step or semitone away from the neighbor note. So if you push 2, half step up is 3. Push 2, half step down is 1. And you're not, it's hard to play chords and stuff, especially just having an octave. If you want to play a major chord, you got to play like this, right? That's C major. If you want to go to F major, you've got to do these gymnastics with your fingers. It's hard. There are ways around it. We'll talk about in a tips and tricks video, ways you can work with it on the step sequencer or the chord mode, but it is not comfortable. It is frustrating. It's very much easier to work on a keyboard if you're familiar with the keyboard. If you don't know how a keyboard works, if you're not a piano player, having a MIDI controller that's a keyboard is not really going to help you. So anyway, so the scale can be changed here super easily. Now watch what happens. Notice again, these white ones, these white pads are the octaves. So that's the same note. Watch what happens when we change it from chromatic to major. Now look, we have an octave here and an octave here. Now we have 2 octaves instead of just over 1. And any note you play is going to be in C major. C because we're in the key of C. Major because we're in the scale of major. So watch. Right? These pads now, these 8 are an entire major scale. All of the notes are in the major scale. So it's this. Watch. Right? Fantastic. And you have a whole nother octave too. Look at that. You have over 2 octaves now playing that major scale. So if you want to play major, and especially playing chords, now you can play chords that span more than 1 octave. Check this out. You can even go down an octave to make it a little more dramatic. It's fantastic. This is a great way to work. You have a lot more to work with. You can easily do chords this way. Chords, we're going to talk more about chords next time. But basically in Western music, to make general chords called triads, you just pick a note in your scale, skip a note, and then hit the 3rd note, skip a note, and hit the 5th note. That's a chord. If you want the next chord in the key, you just go up. Same thing. You want the next one? There are only 7 chords in the scale, and you can make them all this way. And they're even numbered, interestingly, the first octave is numbered how you would number it in music. So when they say, give me the 1 chord, 1, 3, 5, give me the 2 chord, 2, 4, 6, right? Up to 1 to 8. It goes 1 to 7, those are all different notes. 8 is the octave. Okay, so you can also set it to the minor scale. Whoops, wrong one, there we go. Minor scale. Look, it's the same pattern, right? The pads are in the same pattern, but it's a different scale now. How is that? Now, this scale still starts at C, but it's the C natural minor, so it sounds like this. So if you play it, it looks like this. It's got black keys, watch. But now, you just... So what's so great about the Verselab and these pads is if you want to play a minor scale, you're playing C minor, right? Say someone's like, you know what? I want to hear that. Can you bring that up to F minor instead? C minor is just too low. All you got to do is go up to your key, move it from C to F, and play the exact same thing you just played. You don't have to change anything else. because these pads are in the same order. The way you play the pads does not change, just the pitches change. And if you want to experiment with different keys, it's just as easy, because all you have to do, or scales, I mean, is just change the scale. You have so many scales in here. I would specifically say, check out the Lydian scale. That is such an interesting scale. It's got this F, this raised fourth, so it looks like this, right? Things like, it just got that really interesting sound. You hear it in a lot of soundtracks and theme songs and space adventures and stuff. It's really an interesting key. And again, this looks exactly the same. It's got 7 notes like every other scale you've seen, but it has this raised fourth. So this one's going to be different, right? That one's a little weird, a little wonky, a little spicy, but the rest are exactly the same. It's very interesting. Anyway, experiment with these scales. You can get some really interesting sounds using these scales. When you use the scales, if you're not sure what the scale sounds like, an interesting way to find out what the scale sounds like is put a sound on that has something that's held. Like I like this piano plus air pad in the acoustic pianos presets, right? So if you go to preset, acoustic piano, piano plus air pad, I like this one. So if you just hold down your home note, your tonic, right? The root of your scale, in this case C, it's going to be sustained, and then start the next octave and just play some notes and see what it sounds like. You can't play a wrong note because these are all in the scale you're playing in. The reason you're holding down this bottom note is to keep your ear tuned to where home is. The secret to playing in a mode or a scale is to make the root of your scale sound like home. If you're playing in A minor, but it sounds like C is home, it doesn't feel like A minor, it's going to feel like C major. So you're just holding down the root of the scale so you can hear how it relates to the rest of the notes. And come back to C often to root your ear in that note. All right, so is there anything else we need to talk about? Oh yeah, there is one more thing. So frustratingly, on this unit, if you go into hit edit and note again, and you're in these scales, right, at the bottom, there's violin and guitar. This is irritating. So my guess is that this library of scales was made for pads that are, 8 by 8 instead of 4 by 4. Because if you have 8 by 8 pads, like guitar has 6 strings, right? You've got E, A, D, G, B, E. You can easily work out, where the strings are and which notes you can use. On here, though, each string is 2 rows. It's still 8 pads. So watch the guitar. Watch this. There. Now this is the same note as the other. This is like you're playing on a guitar and you're on the string and you're on this 5th fret. So it's the same as the next string. So you've really, on this page, you've only got 2 strings out of the 6. It makes it completely useless, in my opinion. Not at all useful. You could certainly shift octaves, but you wouldn't be able to play live that way, definitely. Even with the violin, which you think might be more interesting, because the violin has 4 strings, you don't get, the open string and 3 frets on 4 strings. No. 2 rows is 1 string. See, again, there's where the next string starts. So you can only play 2 strings at a time in the violin. Completely useless. Again, I think this library of scales was just set on something else, just imported in as a whole. Don't think you're going to be able to, come on here and sound like you're playing a violin or a guitar. You really still have to know which notes are available on the guitar or the violin, which you can play at the same time, which you can't, what the fingering looks like. This is not going to make you sound like you're playing a violin. So just keep that in mind. Very frustrating thing. But a lot of these scales are so interesting. Try them out. Some of them don't have 7 notes, like the whole tone scale. That only has 6 notes, right? It's like this. Let's see. Right? And you've got blue scales, which are only 5 notes. And you've got 6 notes, and you've got pentatonic scales, which are 5 notes. You've got various different kinds of minor scales. They are fun to play with. And again, if you're playing in one of these scales, all of the notes are going to be in that scale. They may sound weird at first, but they all fit together in some way. So play with those, figure it out, see what they sound like. I hope this helped you a little bit. In the next one, the next video I make, we're going to be talking about chord mode, which you're going to use Shift and the style button to get into chord mode. We're going to talk about how chords work and how you can use those as well and how you build chords. But I hope this helped you a little bit. Definitely staying in chromatic mode when you're playing on the Verselab is one of the least useful ways to use this, I think, because you can't really make chords. You can play melodies, but again, you have all these chromatic notes that are not in the scale, so it's hard to make the shapes you need to make chords. If you want to play chords and if you want to have more octaves, just change it to major or minor. And there is another thing too. When you're saving out clips and you're changing like the key of your entire song, which doesn't actually change anything. Anyway, when you do that, you can only select major or minor. So if you're playing one of these other scales, there are going to be notes that just don't show up on the pads. Just FYI, keep that in mind. But yes, definitely edit, note, go to your key and your scale. I'd leave the key at C. That is not going to change anything. The shapes are exactly the same. Just find a sound you like, find a scale that sounds interesting to you, and make something crazy with it. Yay. All right, guys. Have a great day. Go make something fun and useful today. If you have questions, leave them down below. Sorry it took so long to get this video out. I've had some health problems. I will be with you guys again soon in chord mode. Explore it if you can in your own time. See what chord mode is about. There are some errors in chord mode and some ways that it works that are not intuitive, but I hope we'll spend some time talking about that next time. Have a great day, guys. Bye.